How does soil health shape the flavor of our food? How do farmers' choices, the weather, and the soil microbiome impact what we taste? And who are the incredible people growing this better tasting, nutrient dense food, and where can you find it? Welcome to Tasting Terroir, a podcast that explores the fascinating links between healthy soil, regenerative farming, and great flavor. I'm your host, Sara Harper, joined by internationally renowned soil health scientist, Dr. Clapperton. Our mission is to help you discover and enjoy the flavor and health benefits of food grown in healthy soil. Our show explores how soil health enhances food quality and what soil health even is. It promotes regeneratively grown, nutrient-dense foods and shares the stories, tips, and recipes of innovative farmers and food producers who are building a better food system for you. If you're passionate about great tasting food, health, gardening, or farmers markets, this podcast is for you. Let's dig in. In today's episode, Jill and I will fill you in on what we've been up to during our long break and discuss an overview of the next season of Tasting Terroir. Then get ready for an in-depth interview that Jill did with farmer, inventor, and green businessman Bob Quinn. Bob's roots run deep into the rich soil of Big Sandy, Montana, where he returned after earning a PhD in plant biochemistry from UC Davis to apply his scientific knowledge to the family farm. From his return in 1978, Bob embarked on a transformative journey that led him to convert his entire farm of over 3,000 acres to a regenerative organic system in just 3 years, from 1986 to 1988. At the same time, he pioneered Kamut International, a thriving business that turned an ancient grain into a global superfood synonymous with health and community. You can watch a summary of his journey in the film Ancient Grain for Future Farming. Hey, Jill.
How are you, Sara?
I'm good. It's been a while. Lots of stuff has happened for us both. Life throws things our way all the time. I'm super excited to talk to you about our next season of Tasting Terroir and rejuvenating the podcast with some amazing stories from farmers, some interviews that you've already done that I'm excited to see come out. We just want to talk about the new season, where things are now, and give folks an idea of what they can expect. Maybe to start off, share a little bit about what this last year has been like and where you're coming from.
All right. I'm really grateful for the past year. It's been a good year. Every year that you're alive is a great year. You make a difference. It's a great year.
Mm-hmm.
As everyone knows, I made a transition this year away from Audacious. I built the lab, co-founded the company, and the lab is fully functioning. Audacious is off and running. It was time for me to move back to my roots and really get back to the land and the things that make me work better, make my heart sing, feed my soul. And that's really getting my hands dirty, growing things, not necessarily getting my hands dirty, but just growing things and helping other people grow things and do great things with their soil ecosystems. That was my big transition. I had the opportunity after I left Audacious to do a lot of traveling and really see the things going on in the world and in various parts. I have a lot of optimism for where we're going and what we're doing. I have seen so many families making a difference. They have changed their agroecosystems. They're functioning so much better. They have healthy soils. And they're talking about clean water, clean air, climate change, and how they can change the climate in a really positive way. I'm really optimistic. And I think this is an opportunity to highlight the people doing these great things. A lot of them are not common names when you talk about regenerative agriculture. And so I want to let our viewers, the people who listen to our podcast, know more about what's going on out there globally, demonstrate for everybody that there is more to be positive about than we think.
And that's so important because one of the frustrating things from my perspective, looking at media and marketing, is that so often the stories that get told are the dramatic tales of woe or the glitzy marketing is
hyperbolic, or maybe there's a kernel of truth in there somewhere, but people can get disillusioned with the thin gruel that might actually be real. What we know is that there are so many amazing stories out there that we get to tell because you have the trust of these people and you know who they are around the world. They're the kind of people that there's this expression, the workhorse and the show horse. They're the workhorses. And so people aren't always aware that they're there and that they're doing amazing work. So getting to shine a light on that is really exciting. I think it's really needed. I think people are hungry for being able to see tangible, good things happen. A number of these farmers are bringing products to market so people can buy directly from the farmer and know the story behind it and what they're doing. It's really exciting. I know you've had a couple conversations already that we're going to bring forth. Do you want to preview any of that?
Sure. The first person we're going to talk to is Dr. Bob Quinn, talking about somebody who's really changed their soils, living in a drought-prone ecosystem, a dry ecosystem, and doing really fabulous things for the community, growing crops that nobody ever thought you could grow, dryland, and then marketing them. So I think that Bob really encompasses the whole picture of what we're trying to do. And then to this next point, with his new foundation, trying to do more experiments and really shine a light on what can be done in arid northern environments. And I think that's so important. So we're going to start with Bob because he tells the whole picture. And then we're going to move on to shine a light on some other farmers, other families. And I think the focus is really going to be on families. Who are the families? Because oftentimes we hear a lot about, oh, big commercial ag, doing this, doing that, screwing over the world, blah, blah, blah. And we forget that the majority of agriculture in North America, actually around the world, is still done by families.
Mm-hmm.
Our food is still primarily supplied to the big ag companies by families.
Mm-hmm.
I want to highlight these families. I want to talk about what families are trying to do for their community, what they're trying to do for themselves, and how they're trying to grow really great food for everyone. And where people can buy it. If they're selling their food online and whatnot, this is what we want, the stories we want to tell. We're going to talk to some researchers because I can't leave out the researchers and some of the people doing really interesting work and have a very different perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say different, a fun perspective, a way of looking at things that is truly different. We're also going to talk about health, and that's people health. And then we're going to also talk about animal health and how eating great food and looking at things from a different perspective can really affect our health and what we can do about it.
And then in the name of our podcast, Tasting Terroir, it's back to that connection of you can taste the health and you can taste the distinctive place in more than just wine, in bread, in cheese, in beef. Some of the stories that we'll be able to tell really connect to that point too, that this uniqueness that I think people crave, authenticity, you can find it in your food.
We can talk about fibers too, like wool, and how the Haggertys, natural intelligence farmings, how their wool is actually being acclaimed for the way it's grown. The fiber is very different from other fibers. And I think that's a story to also tell.
Oh, it is. And we could have a feeling terroir.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the aromas associated with terroir, which is not just and the change in the food aromas, the change in other aromas. So the whole thing, we're going to try and on a monthly basis, just really tackle, if you want to call it, or expose or shine a light on the people who grow, prepare great food, and those who also grow and prepare other byproducts, food and fiber.
Yeah, from my perspective, I've had a challenging year. I had to step back and become a caregiver for my mother-in-law who had dementia. I'm so grateful, Jill, that you were letting me work as I could on the side. Frankly, I think I would have drifted off into early retirement. But you kept a string connected to me that I'm so grateful for. She recently passed away. So I have time to come back and a new perspective too. Talk about a focus on regeneration. There's nothing like seeing degeneration in such an up close way that makes you grateful for what regeneration can do in our own bodies and the earth. To be part of that hopeful cycle is really exciting for me. So I'm very, very thankful, Jill, for who you are and for this opportunity to come back into this world. My original focus was on policy, the work I did years ago in the Senate and for various other institutions, lobbying and environmental groups. And that's important work. But
Yeah.
I am at a point in my life where I'm understanding now the power of story, not just fluff story, true things that we relate to through story. And so that's more my focus now, telling the stories and bringing these stories to life, particularly of the people that I've gotten to know best in my time working with you, trying to really help that. Because the story is what we share with other people. A story is, oh, I heard this great thing. People will find good things over time, and sometimes they have to have experience. And that's what we're able to do with this podcast, is give people some initial experience for them to then seek a more in-depth version of that experience, whether it's through the products or going to some of these farms. Some of these farms host people and finding an introduction into something that's truly real and deep and good. Being part of telling those stories is a valuable thing, and it's worth doing. I'm excited about that new focus for me. So I can't promise that I'll never again have an angry LinkedIn rant, but that's certainly not my intent, not my focus. And it feels good to let go of that part of it, to remind myself I'm not in charge. It's not up to me, to be part of the positive, to put my focus on shining a light on those who deserve it and letting the rest fall as it falls.
We're also going to talk to Gail Fuller about farm health and negative self-talk, how deadly that is, and how important it is to embrace the positive. I'm really going to try and focus on things that are really positive. We get enough negative. We don't need any more in our lives. Let's talk about the positive that is in our lives, and the positive that other people are experiencing, and the positive that other people are generating. I think we can do that really well as a company. And through this podcast, I think we can really shine a light on a lot of different aspects of agriculture, and that includes regenerative agriculture. I'd also like to talk a lot more about what is regenerative agriculture and where are we going with that, and how farmers can really truly benefit from it. I hope to spur a lot of interest in that area. I'm also going to talk about some other things too, regenerative management. I've been reading a lot of interesting books. I hope we're going to be able to chat with people about them. And some of this will be really new for people. Some of it might be out there, but I think that's okay. It will all revolve around agriculture, or shine a light somewhere in agriculture, our communities or ourselves, somewhere that we can use to benefit agriculture in general. And then the other thing is working with Harvest Today. For me, growing indoor on grow walls, and always had a love of soil and building up soils. But I also understand that, having come from Canada and knowing the North, that there's real winter in places. Real winter means that food has to be transported a long way. And this is an opportunity to actually grow in an efficient manner, great food all year round. So I'm excited to work on that too, like looking at all these new varieties and what's possible there. I think it's going to be really fun.
So a grow wall, for people that don't know, is to grow greens and plants indoors, right?
And in a really efficient way. Harvest Today has a new patented grow wall that is really efficient and actually has a medium. So the roots just don't grow in solution. They actually grow in a medium, which allows you to create a rhizosphere, allows them to have a microbiome. They grow a whole lot better. We're going to explore that. It's all new, and not just me, but there's going to be other researchers around the world doing it as well. So we're going to share that as well.
I think this is a good overview of where we're coming from in this new season. Thanks so much, Jill, for chatting. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I look forward to seeing everybody, hearing people talk about our podcast, the comments on our podcast. I look forward to people seeing more of our website and interacting more with us on LinkedIn and various other social media. So I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. So let's do this.
Okay.
and welcome. This is Tasting Terroir, a podcast that's sponsored by the Global Food and Farm Network and Rhizoterra Inc. I'm Jill Clapperton, the owner of Rhizoterra, and this podcast is really designed to make the link between how we grow food and the nutrient density of food, or how good is the food really for us? Flavors, all those aspects of food. And we know that you can taste the soil in the food, how we've managed the soil in the food. And so this is a start of us really focusing in with farmers who are growing food in a way that's totally in line with nature, which is better for the planet, better for us, better for our animals, and as we say at Rhizoterra, healthy soil for a healthy world. So welcome to Tasting Terroir, a trademark of Rhizoterra Inc. So before we go, I just want to say to Bob and thank him for his undaunted enthusiasm for farming and growing nutritious food. He has always inspired me to do more and to be better, and I hope that he's done the same for you. Again, Tasting Terroir is a podcast of the Global Food and Farm Network and Rhizoterra Inc., and we look forward to seeing you again soon. And if you like it, please subscribe. Hello, Bob. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you're
I
looking
get to
great.
see you instead of just talking to you on the phone.
I know, this is fantastic.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Jill Clapperton, and I'm hosting Tasting Terroir today. And we have Bob Quinn with us today. Bob is a farmer. He is an author. He is an entrepreneur. And now he is the director of a new research institute, the Quinn Institute. And we're really happy to have Bob on today. Before I let Bob talk a little bit, I'm going to just say that, and I'm going to date us, Bob. I'm sorry, but
That's all right.
we have known each other for probably close to 30 years.
Yeah.
Since I was a young scientist at Ag Canada. And Bob and I have shared a lot of the same interests over the years, not just farming, but also genetics, but also, oh, and I forgot to say that, you're a scientist too. PhD
Yes.
in plant biochemistry from UC Davis. But we have shared this same common interest in how do we farm the soil in such a way as to have nutrient-dense food.
Yes.
And how can we use that nutrient-dense food to really improve the health of our communities and the planet and people in general,
Yes.
as well as our livestock, right? Because
Yes.
when we grow multi-species covers and things like that. I wanted to say that first, and then as we go on, and now I want you to tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with the Institute and how you came to form an institute.
It was a dream I've had for, oh gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so. And when none of my kids came back to take over the farm, I decided to turn it into reality, because if your kids are coming back, you can't take, a big chunk of the farm and say, this is off limits for you. But if they're not there, I didn't want that situation where, after we died or sometime the farm was sold and then all the money went to the kids, ruined their life like money does. So we decided to avoid that and use a good share of the farm and turn it into a regenerative organic research, education, and health institute. And so we just got started. This is ending our first year of really research. We formed it last year. During the summer, we had a big get together with friends and scientists from all over the country who came and gave us ideas and their 2 bits. And we took a lot of suggestions and put together a white paper, which I sent to you.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now.
Anyway, we tried to outline our vision for the whole thing. Our vision is to, just like you said, is to help to grow high nutrient-dense food to not only heal the earth, heal our communities, heal our farms, but also heal the people that live here and eat the food that they're eating now, which is in many cases leading to chronic disease. And our country now is plagued with 60% of our population has at least one chronic disease. We're the sickest country in the world, and yet we have the greatest agricultural infrastructure. But unfortunately, it's been turned into an industrial base for just growing tons and tons of food without really focusing on nutrition. Some of that industrialization has been to the detriment of nutrition. And some of it, like with extreme highly processed foods, things have been added that actually deteriorates our health, and it's not good for our health. So we have two things going on. We have a decline in nutrition, and we have an increase in residues and additives, which actually detract from our health. And so we're interested in helping to avoid both of those.
Okay, but this is a research farm, right?
It's more than just a farm. So
Okay.
Jill, what we want to do in one place is show people how you connect, starting with good seed into healthy soil, producing good food. And then we want to have a teaching kitchen and small processing facilities where we can bring people in and actually provide the meals right off of the farm. And so they see the transformation in a very simple way of what we can grow to what you put on your table. We hope to have a small flour mill so we can grind grain into flour and make breads and pastries and that sort of thing. We hope to have some small meat processing facilities so that we can take chickens or pigs or something, small animals particularly, from the field onto your table eventually. We want to have a health component, which would support physicians who would come, who specialize particularly in disease, which is like diabetes or other disease,
Or
heart disease,
right?
Yes, those kinds of things that are chronic, and prescribed to them, not pills from the pharmacy, but food from the farm. And so they can see, those kind of people particularly can see from the beginning to the end, the importance of the whole chain. And so many people go through life without really a concept of from the beginning to the end of how their food is produced and what they're putting in their mouth. And so we thought it would be a very unique and helpful. They could see it from the beginning to the end. So that's why it's not just a farm. The farm is a very important component, but we want to go on from there. We want to start earlier than some people start thinking, and that's with the seed and the soil preparation and how we prepare for seeding the crops. We prepare and start to nourishing our soils a year or 2 years or 3 sometimes before the actual food crop is planted. So we're planting crops for sale and we're planting crops for soil. And all those things go together. And that's what we're trying to show, the best way to put those together. And of course, you and I have talked about different ideas on that subject for years and years.
Yes.
And it's still for the Northern Great Plains, where we're located in north central Montana, it's still a question that hasn't really been fully understood. And there's not a magic formula, but we want to have principles that we can teach other farmers that they can adapt. All over, particularly we're looking at the shortgrass prairie of the Northern Great Plains, which is southern Alberta, where your home was, where we first met when you're in Lethbridge, across to southern Saskatchewan, down to western Dakotas, about halfway through the Dakotas, and then up going west to the Rocky Mountains, so eastern Montana, and then little bits and pieces of Colorado and Wyoming and Nebraska before the rain starts increasing, where they can grow
Before
corn.
it gets to be more of a moist grass prairie and the tall grass prairie.
That's right, the tall grass prairie. And in that place, they can grow corn. So we know that when we're in the corn country, we're out of shortgrass prairie for sure.
Yeah. And then also to include, as we go into Saskatchewan and Alberta, the mixed grass prairie as well, which is
That's right.
a cool season prairie. So there's lots of opportunity there for sure. So one of the things we talked about a little, you talked about nutrition and whatnot. So I'm going to say that I didn't start at the beginning with Kamut International and your seed breeding and your interest in seed breeding. But I also didn't talk about the fact that with Kamut International, you did a lot of health work.
Yeah, actually, Jill, that was what really introduced me to the idea of food as medicine. I didn't go to school and learn that idea, or that didn't come to me even the first 5 or 10 years of my conversion organic. We were focusing on organic production, and it was trying to be done in a regenerative way, using legumes primarily as our cover crops and soil building crops in between each year of in Montana. In this part of the world, the shortgrass prairie, we can only grow a crop for sale every 2 years anyway. So what do you do with the ground while you're saving up the moisture? Most people traditionally just black fallow. That means they just worked it over and over all summer and then hoped it didn't blow away. Yeah, and a lot of it did. Some of it did blow away. And we tried to counter that by strip farming, which means we had very narrow strips so that the wind wouldn't have a huge area to blow away at once. But people have done away with those. And now they've introduced Roundup, a chemical spray which kills everything, and they call that chem fallow. So they're not tilling the ground anymore, but they're putting poison on it 6 or 8 times a year. And if you add the before and after seeding, it's even 10 or more. And now we have Roundup so contaminating our environment. We have it in our rain right now that falls on our farm. So that's a short-term approach that was a lot of excitement over. And of course, people are making billions of dollars off of this that make Roundup. But it's really time to look at alternatives and try to live without poisons or grow food without poisons, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. And if we think about organic food, people want organic food because it doesn't have any pesticide residues on it. And it's what we could call maybe cleaner food. But I've noticed in the paper, you talk about being a regenerative organic farmer. And we all know the term regenerative has become very sexy these days,
Yeah.
that term.
Yeah.
And it's something that a number of us have been doing for a very long time, which is rebuilding our soils and really focusing in on soil health. But let me ask you this. What does regenerative mean to you?
That's a really good question. And the trouble is with regenerative now, there's no legal definition. So it has been co-opted by people that we wouldn't consider regenerative really and how we think of them, but by all kinds of groups. And that's why I really like the idea of putting organic together with regenerative and combining it and calling it regenerative organic, because organic's already defined. And if you add regenerative to it, then you are really focusing on, in my mind, on soil health, because most of regenerative, whether or not they use any chemicals or whatever they're doing, most of the focus is on soil health. And if you combine that with organic, some organic operations, let me back up and say it this way. In my mind, the difference between organic and chemical agriculture was primarily that we focused on feeding, as organic farmers, we focused on feeding the soil. In chemical agriculture, the focus is on feeding the plant. So you decide what the plant needs, and then you buy that and you put it on the soil. The soil really isn't anything but just to hold the plant up and keep it from blowing away. And then you hope your soil doesn't blow away. But anyway, you feed the plant, and that's what you focus on. And when I first started converting to organic, what I was taught by my mentors was that the focus is on feeding the soil and the health of the soil. And if the soil is healthy, it feeds the plant and everything works. And your nutrition on the plant then is increased, and the health of the people that eat it is increased. So everything is improved. But now, and that I call that the regenerative organic model. But if you have the industrial model of organic, and this is what really frightens me and concerns me, that the industrialization of organic agriculture, and that is starting to come in with first a different mindset, a mindset that you can feed the plant, but you can do it organically. And so I don't care I do care. I'm glad you're not using poisons, but I'm not happy that you're focusing on feeding the plant again, because we should really be focusing on feeding the soil. And when you combine those two ideas, then you have the best of both worlds. So in my mind, organic without regenerative is just as efficient or a shortfall as regenerative without organic. To really hit the best of both worlds, I think we should need to put them together. We need to put those two ideas together in a way that really defines what we're doing in both cases, because organic is also not totally defined on how much soil building and how you should do it. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Okay. Obviously, we have always shared the same concerns, because my focus has always been on rhizosphere ecology and the plant root zone and how we build healthy soils and healthy productive soils. And I agree. In reading about the Institute and the white paper and what you're doing, and it's really obvious that the model is more based on soil health, abundance, like productive soils, but not abundance for the sake of abundance. And so that balance where you have abundance and quality, because the other thing is, I think, because we're just having a chat here, what's important is that we need to maintain some kind of productivity, no matter what.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Otherwise, we broke. The farmers broke,
exactly.
and then who's going to feed the world?
Exactly.
The farmers all broke. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but at the same time, we need more quality involved in this food, because do you want to just eat a bunch of calories? And remember, you and I both have talked about this before. A lot of the nutrition models are based on calories, and that's a problem, because we don't need just calories. We need real nutrition, which is mineral nutrients. and amino acids and vitamins and all these things that are, and antioxidants that are really good for us.
Yep. And they have
And-
inflammatory properties. And
Yeah.
we had no idea about that, Jill, until we started with our research project. And that's how we got started on this conversation. That with Kamut, comparing ancient wheat with modern wheat. And the biggest difference we saw was in inflammation. The diet of ancient wheat for people who had chronic diseases like diabetes and irritable bowel syndrome and heart disease and all kinds of chronic diseases. And these are double-blind crossover studies. So people ate one either ancient grain or modern grain, and they didn't know what they're eating. Then they were on a washout period for 6 weeks or so, and then they crossed over and they ate the other diet for 6 or 8 weeks. And so it was a very well-controlled study, and it was very consistent that, and they were eating organic grains. So it wasn't a question of, are there residues, pesticide residues on this or not? It wasn't that. We were keeping that the same. The only difference was it a modern wheat or an ancient wheat. The modern wheat has been bred for great yields, is what you said, by making it shorter, by making it more disease resistant, by all kinds of things. But no one ever looked at nutrition. And I think that there's been some things lost. So either there's been things lost or there is things added with all these other things that they were doing. They made the gluten stronger so they can make more bread with less wheat, because you can have more air in the bread because the gluten is stronger and holding in that air. So that was a difference in the makeup of it. So now 20% of the population in at least America can no longer eat wheat without some kind of a difficulty. So that tells you right there that something has gone a little bit wrong. But we were astonished to find that it wasn't something, it's more than just the gluten. So when you had people reducing their inflammation with these chronic diseases just with a different diet, that started me on the whole idea that, well, maybe food is our medicine, like Hippocrates said 2,300 years ago, for heaven's sakes. Sometimes it takes longer for ideas to catch on than others.
Okay, that might be a little long.
Yeah, that's right. That's several lifetimes, right? 2,300 years. But anyway, it was something that was taught in the ancient world of Greece, and in the last since modern times in the end of World War II, and we really went into the industrialization of agriculture and food in a big way. And it was a goal of this country that we would never be hungry. And so the goal was maximum production, abundance, and cheap food. And the government, with the government's help, we achieved that goal. But a little side effect that no one thought about, and people doing the work, they had no idea. They weren't doing this on purpose to say, yeah, we're going to sacrifice nutrition for this. No, nobody thought about that. It was not an issue. And all of a sudden, here we are sick. We're all 60% of us are sick. And the CDC says that 60% of that is due directly to the diet that people are eating. And so no one thought that there would be such a fallout that there has been. And that's why now I'm not the only one talking about this. There's all kinds of people talking about. In fact, now we know
it's a hot topic these days.
Yeah, after the election now, Kennedy says he's going to bring back the health of America. And he's talking about these same things. He's talking about looking at organically grown food and the quality of nutrition rather than just more and more pills that don't heal you. They treat symptoms, but they don't go to the root cause. And we really need to get to the root cause of some of these really awful diseases like autism and some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of, I hear a lot of physicians and people who have a lot of influence talking about food as medicine and how food has all these anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, a lot of different properties. And I think, and mental health too, like affect mental health.
That's right.
And it mostly because it, like I've studied, which is the rhizosphere and all the microorganisms, it's that gut microbiome and feeding it. And just like everything else, it doesn't like to eat crap.
Yeah, that's right. And Jill, did you ever think all the studies you did with the mycorrhiza and everything, did you ever think, when did it start to dawn on you? Because I'm sure it did pretty early, because you're a smart gal. And when did it start to dawn on you that the microbiome of the gut is just almost identical type of thing as we don't call it that, but the microbiome of the soil? And they both are functioning so similarly. And
they are. They're
talk
both
about that.
Digesters. Actually, it came pretty early because the person, when I came to Ag Canada, the person whose lab I inherited was Dr. Michael Hines. And he'd been working on rhizobium and these other things. And he had a postdoc. And his postdoc said to me, he said, Jill, I think what we should work on is a biological pill to re-inoculate everybody's gut. And I'm sorry now we didn't do it because, man, we would have made a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right.
But instead, he worked on inoculants for silage for animals because it was easier to do.
Yeah.
And actually, it was fairly rewarding, but also it was something that we understood more. Like we understood more about the rumen microbiology.
Yeah.
And even the rhizosphere, we knew what was going on in the rhizosphere. And the work that I had done looking at how when we have plants when we have plants colonized by mycorrhiza, we have all this more mineral nutrition in the plant. I got it fairly early on, but it was like what to do with it. I remember I went to a conference in the early 90s where I met Ross Welch and Jerry Coombs, and I was a new scientist. I think I was like 2 years into the job out of a PhD. And it was at the University of Boston, actually. And so it was the first time I'd come to Boston. And I was astounded. It was supposed to be about crop production and nutrition, and it wasn't. In fact, people didn't understand anything about crop production. I wasn't the only one who was there. Like everybody was talking market gardens and people buying food, and it was very urban oriented and not production oriented. And we said, wait a minute, nobody that we're working with is going to sell into a farmer's market.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not going to sell a super bean to a farmer's market.
You're trying to shovel off a few bushels, a sack full of grain. Everybody's sad. Then what are they going to do with it? No one has bills.
Yeah, and there were people from ARS there from California who were like growing acres of broccoli and cauliflower and things like that. We're like, and they were just trashing that model. Everybody has to grow their own food. And the truth of the matter is, we can't feed everybody by growing if everybody has a backyard garden, because some people I'm not really all that good at programming, but I'm really good at growing something. We all have the things we're really good at. And and so having everybody just being responsible for their own food, there's a reason why we have cooperatives and we had farms where other people were taking over, because we need that. It came to me pretty early on, and it also really linked up to me with organic matter, like really understanding that the most biologically active zone of the entire soil is that root area. And then I started to really understand that what plants I grew changed the mycorrhiza, changed the whole root microbiome, changed the nutrient density of the plants. I saw that where we changed the whole mineral nutrient density. I remember asking people in nutrition, I go, what should I be measuring? And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well,
this is a challenge, and it's still a challenge. We still have not got a definitive test on what high nutrient dense means. What does it mean? And so can you give me a label? Can you give me a ratio of 1 to 10 or something? We don't have that. We don't have that. That would be so helpful, really, for the buyer and the shopper, because we can talk about all kinds of rules and regulations and how to change agriculture. But I'll tell you one thing that changed it faster than anything is the marketplace. And if people aren't buying what you grow, let me tell you, you're not going to be growing it very long. And on the other hand, if they're demanding and say they will buy more and pay more for something grown in a certain way that has a certain proven value, and they're willing to pay for that extra value, then watch the farmers adapt to that very quickly. They'll be standing in line to learn how to do it. And that's what we're trying to be in a position to be ready for when that gets figured out. And it's not figured out yet, but that's what I see the future.
You went organics, you get a premium for organics. There's a lot of farmers I've worked with that are not certified organic, but really take care of the environment and can prove that they have better infiltration, they have cleaner water, all these things. They have better ecological services on their soil. Truthfully, nobody really wants to pay for that. We need it.
But what they will pay for, I think, in my opinion, is higher nutrition. And it doesn't matter how you get that. The people you're working with, I am sure if we had a nutritional test of some kind that was easy and replicable and not too expensive, you'd find that they were producing high nutrient dense food. And that's what we should be paid for, I think. That's the value. And there may be several roads to Rome in this case, or high nutrition, and it doesn't matter so much how you get there. But if we could figure out a way to categorize that and label that in a way that really is meaningful and reproducible, because we also have the pluses you do, and then you have the absence of minuses, like even the processing. The farmers can do all the best job in the world, and then what if it's processed and added some coloring agents or something that actually are a detriment? So we need to have a way to give credit for people that are doing the right thing and warn people about things that are not right and a detriment to us. And that would be the cat's meow if we could reach that, because then we could stop all the fights about. There's a big fights about hydroponic, for example.
Yeah.
But wonder if we could show that hydroponic done in a way that a lot of it's done is producing food with very low nutrition, for example, and have that on the label. Who would buy that compared to a similar product that is high nutrient dense with whatever's in it that makes it nutrient dense? I think that would be an easy solution to that, rather than just fighting which is better and which is not with just a bunch of platitudes.
So in that case, you've really talked about systems, like growing systems. And for me, as I'm a co-founder of Audacious, and that whole idea of measuring nutrition is what Audacious does.
Yeah.
My big goal, though, in all of this is to be able to connect what's in the food with how we've grown it, so that we can all grow it in a better way, and not prescriptively.
Right. That's the end.
You know?
That's the end game. That's exactly the goal we should be striving for. I agree 100% with that.
Because we can have in my view, we can have all the genetically modified food, and we can pump all the chemicals on it. And honestly, I could fertilize the heck out of something and have it all nutritious.
Yeah.
But does that serve the ultimate purpose of actually helping the planet too? Because if I look at this, I believe that everything is connected.
Yes, of course.
So I'm a proponent of the Gaia theory and Gaia, and I believe that all of this is connected. Everything we do is connected. And so for me, I can create really nutritious food. I know I can.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes that's not in a really good way that is consistent with the integrity of the environment. So for me, I think it's really important that that there's some way that the nutritional outcome is connected with how somebody's growing it, just like certified organic, but certified organic with that regenerative aspect to it, where it says, okay, I'm also really taking care of the environment at the same time.
Yeah.
And I don't want it, I guess for me, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm going to ask you this after I finish here, is I don't want it to be prescriptive, because I believe that one size fits no one.
Yeah. No, I don't agree with that. I think one size at least fits someone. Hopefully,
okay, I
hopefully.
like that.
But one size doesn't fit all. That's the problem. And that's been the prescriptive idea, that we get a prescription and it fits everybody. It fits everybody. It might not fit no one, but it might only fit one. But that's not
the guy, if it's the person who actually designed the thing.
build it for yourself. Yes, okay.
Okay.
But anyway, but I agree with the principle you're trying to express. I agree with that 100%. And that's why I don't know. There's a lot of research right now trying to understand what really is nutrient dense. And there's a lot of folks testing for different aspects of that.
Yeah.
And what we saw with the Kamut studies, it was quite enlightening on one hand, but frustrating on the other, because we saw these difference, but we had no way to explain it. We had done an analysis of the Kamut grain compared to the modern wheat. It really wasn't that different. Normal things you look at. And then it got me thinking, wonder if it's a combination of things we're actually not looking at, with secondary metabolites plants. And you've gone into that more than most, but still it's a hit and miss, and we don't know exactly how they are acting in concert with one another, or if one is low or one is high. Is that the same as being absent altogether, or in abundance, or whatever? And I was thinking, why don't we see if we can have a living system like a cell culture that would indicate not how it's going on, but what's going on. So we can say that you can put in a piece of food or a plant or whatever you're dealing with, or an end product, and then you could measure anti-inflammatory reactions, oxidant reactions. We were looking at doing cell cultures with gut cells so we could look at tight junctions, which is also
leaky gut, right?
yeah, leaky gut is a huge problem and
Yeah.
causes other problems that really wouldn't be problems in the cell if the gut was tight the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
So we have these kinds of things that are all playing in ways that it's so complex, it's really hard to understand. But if we could have a living system that we could at least get an index.
Like a bioassay.
Yes, exactly. We don't need to understand exactly what's going on, but we understand what the end result is. And so this is either a good result or a bad result. So we go back to how we got there. How was it grown? How was it processed? What kind of seeds were used? All the kind of things you've been talking about too. And that's what, and you can avoid the prescriptive thing because there could be many ways to reach the same end. And you could demonstrate that. And that's what I think would be very excited about.
Yeah, I agree. And part of this is about whole foods, right?
Yes.
Like, I read the studies and everybody talks about how important it is to eat whole foods, because now I'll go back to my roots
Okay.
and how we can analyze the DNA and we can look at all the microbial communities in and around the roots, and we can identify some of them, not even close to all of them. But the thing about it is that there's all these helper molecules and there's all these helper bacteria. We don't know what they do. We just know that if I don't have this whole community, it doesn't work.
That's right.
And I don't even know who the whole community is.
That's right.
I know if I don't have them.
That's true. They don't have a name.
Yeah. It's like when you're birding. Oh, that's a little brown bird.
That's it.
LBC.
Oh, dear.
And I think it's the same thing. You're just like, oh, okay, I know I need the whole thing. And I think part of that is, and I think about it now as a plant physiologist, we know the genome, but we don't know about all the bioactive compounds that plants produce. Because
that's exactly right.
It constantly changes. It's dynamic.
Yes.
And they are breaking them down and they're reconfiguring them all the time. And it's
if they're under attack, if
they
they're
do
under
it on
attack,
a day basis. No, they could be
if they're
doing it
under
hourly or minutely.
Yeah, that's right. And if they're under attack, they're making new ones that never existed before to help with whatever the attack is.
Yeah.
So that it's a constant flux. But in the end, it all comes together to make an end product that's either better or not as good. And we can help modulate that. That's what's exciting to me, because but the more we understand it, the more we can say, okay, we'll try this or that or whatever.
We can manage. My thing is I can manage soils. I can use plants and I can manage soils so that our whole foods are really, that they work.
Yeah.
And whether or not we know exactly how they work.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter.
For me, really, I like you. It's like, maybe a bioassay is good enough and go plus or minus. Yeah, it works. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing experiments like you are at the Institute, you can say, okay, this one, no, this one, yes. And start dwindling them down. I see that with, actually, Dean Ho does studies at the University at Singapore. He's a biomedical engineer. And he was talking about small experiments like that, where you just take all the data together and then you start looking at it and going, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what dose would work, what dose doesn't work, how would we combine these doses? And in many ways, he's working mostly on chemotherapy, or was, but he was people were becoming well with less chemical, with less dose, with lower dosage, and mixing them up. Okay, we'll put this one first and this one second, and we'll these kinds of things. And then a few years ago, I was at a couple of meetings out at Piscine's ranch, hosted by Sally Calhoun, where we talked about where doctors were coming in to look at how we were doing things, like to learn about soil health and whatnot. And that was really interesting, because in California, in places like the Alameda Clinic, they had food pharmacy, and California actually allows them to write prescriptions, and they get like a voucher for fresh food.
That's great.
And I know that Jimmy Emmons was talking that they're doing something like that in Oklahoma. So these things are cropping up all over the place, where they're, with the food deserts and people not getting enough really good fresh food, they're actually providing it and providing them extra funds in order to get it. I think that's the model we want to pursue. But then it's up to us as growers,
Yeah.
to be growing this great food.
But we should also be compensated for that, like anyone else who does a job. If you do it well, you should be compensated well. And if we could devise a way to pay farmers for nutrients per acre rather than tons per acre, wouldn't that be a cool thing?
Yeah,
And
that
so
would be a very cool thing.
And then but we have to understand what we're doing. And someday we'll understand what these things are going on, but there's so much we don't understand, but we do understand the direction we want to go, I think. And I think that's really important, that we make some progress in that direction. And we understand, I think we're starting to understand quite clearly directions we don't want to go in. And so we can say, okay, that's not the right direction. And I think that, so we have enough knowledge to get started. And we don't have to have the whole picture figured out, but we can encourage the good directions that we understand, that are starting to understand, and discourage the bad directions that now we're starting to also to understand.
Yeah, I agree. Temple Grandin once said to me, she goes, it seems to me, Jill, that we know a lot about what is not soil health.
Yeah. Yes.
And we recognize what is soil health, but we don't know a lot about it. So why don't we just go with this is not soil health and this is soil health.
Yeah.
And make it really simple. And I was like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
I know. Yes. No wonder she's authority.
I love how she just drills down into those simple.
I know, to the very basic. Yeah.
And,
basic essence. Yeah.
Yeah. And why didn't you think of that? And you're like, yeah, don't know. Too caught up in all the details and whatnot. But let's go back to offering a place-based approach to solving national food and health crises. And Quinn Institute. Why don't you tell us a little bit? We know that you did a lot of studies with Kamut International that really got you started and down the path to looking at food as medicine.
Yeah.
What experiments are you doing now? And where are you going with the Institute right now?
Another thing that really, an experience I had at the food show, Jill, I should share with you, that really changed also the way I look at my farm, is I was standing in the booth selling Kamut at the time, but this lady came up to me just right out of the blue, and she shook my hand real forcefully, looked right into my eyes and said, "Thank you for growing food for my family." I thought, wow.
Oh.
No, I've never heard anything like that before. Yeah, a wheat farmer in Montana never sees their end customer. We don't even think about growing wheat as a food. We think about it as a commodity. Yeah. And everything is commodity, as commodity market, as commodity everything. And I had, because I was selling Kamut as a food, I was looking at the markets. But
yeah, you have delicious snacks. I love them.
I know. But when I went home, my whole farm, I didn't think about wheat as a food. I thought it's the commodity. That's what I had been raised. That's how I thought about it. After that experience, I went home and I never grew another commodity ever on my farm ever again. The only thing I'm growing on my farm now is food. And that's food that is healthy and contributes to people's vitality and their good health. And it's just a mental switch of how to look at stuff. So now I'm looking at more than just wheat. We're looking at vegetables. Montana's not a place where you think you can grow vegetables, but actually we can grow vegetables. The homesteaders all had gardens and they all grew vegetables and they were pretty self-sufficient. But and we can't grow everything. We can't, in dryland, it's been my experience, we can't grow lettuce and we can't grow Swiss chard and that sort of stuff it's mostly a leafy vegetable and doesn't have a big root system, but we can do very well with things that might surprise me. Tomatoes, we can't grow the big gigantic ones, but we can grow the medium-sized ones and the small ones just fine. We can grow
cherry tomatoes, more wild type.
Yeah, and we can grow onions, and we can grow squash, and we can grow watermelons. I was in Israel one time, and my friend who's guiding me around says, "We have a watermelon that grows in the desert." And I said, "Oh, I have a desert." And so I was able to get some seeds. And by golly, this watermelon just grows fine with no water other than the 12 to 14 inches of rain we get. I have to spread those plants about 3 times further apart than what we would in their garden or what they can do in Ohio or Iowa, where they don't even water their lawns, for heaven's sakes. But when you do that, it gives them enough space. And when I started doing all the research and calculations on that, it dawned on me that the space they needed was about 3 times more than normal. And when you compare our rainfall with theirs, with the Midwest, where they're not irrigating normally,
Which
it's
is
about 3 times. And so I thought, well,
Yeah.
for heaven's sakes, why can't I figure this out without doing all these experiments? So we're past that. But now we are doing things like promoting dryland vegetables in a region that we could supplement, at least have some basis for our diet. Not that we replace everything we brought in, but when you look at what's going on in California, how much longer is the water going to last there when they're fighting over the water with the cities on all the time? I don't think we can look at California to feeding the whole country anymore. And we need to get in a position where we can, region by region, be in a better position to feed ourselves. And that's what we're going to be doing. And so I've taken that's one aspect we're doing. We are also taking the idea that Kamut is a spring grain. Now we're looking at winter wheat, and we're looking at hard white winter wheat. So one of the other things you talked about, whole foods. Wheat is, and I'm most familiar with wheat. I'm a wheat farmer in the beginning. And so what do they do with wheat? They make white flour out of it. What's white flour? That's what you get when you peel off the bran and the germ and you feed it to the pigs. That is about 1/3 of the kernel. And so the pigs are eating better than we are because that's all full of minerals and vitamins and all kinds and fiber and antioxidants that helps your digestion and your whole body and all this stuff. And we're feeding it to the pigs. But yet people are reluctant. Most of our bread wheats are red wheats. That means the bran has a very dark red color. And it also imparts a little bit of bitterness and sometimes to the end product. So people add sugar or honey or whatever to help with that. But if you start with a white wheat and you make that into flour, it's not near as dark. It produces bread that's tannish and is a lot more easy for kids to start to eat, but it's not so dark, and some of the adults too. And therefore you're not throwing away the third that you throw away with a white flour to make white bread. We have canned bread that's made with whole wheat, but it's whole white wheat. So we're experimenting with that. And we found, we started with 100 different wild types from Turkey. So we know they're ancient grains too. So they've never been messed with for their genetics.
So these are Aegean wheats?
Is there what?
Are they Aegean wheats?
AGM.
Aegean, Greek, Turkish.
Yeah, they're all from, wheat originated in Mesopotamia. So generally in that part of the world, that was the origin of wheat. So they're coming from that basic area where it was first originated. But there are all so many different kinds, Jill. In Montana, we grow probably, I don't know what, 8 or 10 that are the most prevalent ones and probably make up 90% of what's grown. And most of the big wheat states, that's the same thing. It's very narrow in what we grow. And so what I'm doing, I'm not doing so much breeding. You gave me a little credit for a big plant breeder in the beginning. I'm not really a breeder. I'm a seeker and finder. And so my idea is to see what's out there already and pick things that already have good qualities. And if we need to put a little insect resistance into them or something like that, I don't have a big problem with that. But I do have a big problem if they're going to take all of these changes and modify things so much that now we have something that people can't eat without trouble. And so we're looking for things that we don't have to modify and see what kind of luck we can find. So we started with 100 different selections from the seed bank or the small grains collection in Idaho. About 65 of those fell over. They were too tall and fell over and lodged here in Montana. And so we couldn't harvest them. So we kicked them out right away. So we had a little over 30. And then we started whittling them down to uniformity. And we did some bake tests and whatnot. But it was even though these are supposed to be all hard red wheat samples, we found 15 cases where there were some white kernels in those samples because they weren't pure. They just collected out in the wild. And so they weren't exactly pure lines. They didn't start with a single head. They start with a group of heads probably. Anyway, so we picked out just the white kernels. And last year we had 15 different varieties lines that we were planting. And even all of those were not pure. So we compared all the heads and we ended up with about, 23 or 20, 22, 23 that were different looking. And so now we've sent those to Arizona to grow out headlines over the winter so that they're uniform. And then we'll start over comparing those. But even the ones that we compared so far, we found great differences. Out of those 15, we picked 6 that really had nice baking characteristics. We're really primarily looking at flavor and aromas because those are connected with, you have flavors and aromas due to polyphenols and other secondary metabolites in plants. And those secondary metabolites, by and large, are really responsible for anti-inflammatory properties, anti-oxidation properties, and that sort of thing. And so they're very much tied, even though we don't have a real foolproof method of nutrient assessment. The rule of thumb is if it tastes good and smells good, it probably is good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the rule people lived by for thousands of years. And they made selections on that. But isn't it interesting that those kinds of things and making selections based on that actually was producing a higher and higher nutritional value to what they ended up with? And so that's what we're trying to go back to a little bit. And we also,
yeah, I
what we're
get
doing.
that.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And if we have something that's nutritionally has good aroma and good flavors, and one yields 25 bushel, one yields 50, we're going to pick up the one that is 50. But if they're like 40 and 50, or if they're close, we'll probably mix them at the end. We'll make a mixture. We're not looking for the one variety or the one line that does all this. This is all powerful, everything. Because no one person has all the talents or all the good aspects. And so if you can make a population and mix together different things that make a really good end product, I think this is a better way to go. And this is where we're really shooting for this hard white wheat project.
So I'm just going to go back for people who might not have understood exactly some of that. When you found the grains that were white, did you grow them out separately from?
Yes. So I took them into my local Rotary Club, and I offered to buy a $25 ticket on something that was going on by another Rotary Club on a chance, a big drawing or something.
Yeah.
If they would pick out 1 cup full of white kernels for me. And it was really amazing, Jill. The ranges on those 15 were 25. The lowest was like 22% white, but the highest was like 93%. The guys that got the 90 sacks, they thought it was a really good deal because they could pick out white kernels pretty fast. But the ones who only had to pick out 1 kernel and 5 was white because it was in the 20s, they felt they had done poorly by. And
so they were thinking they needed to buy 2 tickets.
I gave them 2 tickets. Some of them I did, yes. I didn't really think ahead. But what we tried to do is then purify the white kernels, or select for the white kernels, and then just plant white kernels this last.
But then the white kernels, so then what you said was that some of the white kernels didn't grow whole white heads.
There were some of my helpers, they weren't all white. Some put in some red kernels, and we were able to distinguish those. But that's why we decided to go now with some single heads and planting those out, because if you really, they're not going to change from white to red. The genetics are in there and set, but it's very hard not to get them mixed up if you're growing them together and that sort of thing. So you have to be very careful and pick out kernels one by one, or pick out the heads one by one, so that they don't contaminate then the next year's seeding. So that's where we are now, is purifying those lines. And then we'll do the bake test on individual pure lines, but then at the end, we'll combine the best lines into a population.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's what we're trying to do.
I just wanted to make sure that some of the people who might be watching this or listening to it understood more about the process of how you make those selections and then how you grow them out. Because it's really important, because this is basic. Yeah. This is how people have done it for thousands of years, selecting based on the characteristics they want and doing that. Now with the white wheat then, so that means that I can have a whole wheat loaf that doesn't look like brown bread.
That's right. In fact, a couple of the samples the flour had a yellowish tinge, and that's a little bit like the Kamut. But this is hard white winter wheat, and it's a bread type of wheat. And when you bake that into bread and cut the loaves, they were golden. Wow. Lovely. Okay, this is what we're looking for. This is even better. And we sent those away for nutritional analysis. And as you know, that the golden color probably indicates that there's higher maybe vitamin E or vitamin A, which are both yellowish. Yeah. So this could be great, exciting. We haven't got the results back yet, but we're already starting to be able then by color to differentiate maybe some higher nutritional values.
Oh, that'd be great. Those things are all really valuable. So that's an example of one of the studies you're doing. Yeah. I know you're doing more studies than just that.
Okay, good. How many days do we have to talk now?
No, that was a lot of in-depth on that one.
I didn't mean
highlights on the other ones.
Okay.
So tell us more about some of the other studies.
All right, if people are familiar with the northern Great Plains, and particularly Sugargrass Prairie, where we have only 12, 14 inches of rain, it's all alkaline soils. It means there's a lot of salt also in the soil. And we have a phenomenon called saline seep. And saline seep occurs when water falls in a high spot, maybe a sandy knoll of a hilltop or something, goes underground, and then hits an impervious layer like clay, which is then forced back up to the surface. And it carries with it all these dissolved salts. And when it gets to the surface, it evaporates. It comes to the surface, makes the surface wet and muddy, and then the water evaporates, but it leaves behind all these salts, and you get a big white area called the alkali spot, or salt spot, or salt lick, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, nothing grows there, and they're all over. And you can aggravate that by how you farm. And summer fallow is the worst thing you can do by not growing a crop around those areas, because it aggravates the amount of water then that comes down and then goes back up, and it leaves that salt deposit. So one of the ways we can solve that, and it looks like snow. I was on a train once coming back from Chicago in days when we rode trains instead of airplanes. And the lady next to me said, "Oh, look at there." And this was in July, Jill, so it was the middle of the summer. "Well, they still have snow here in Montana," they said, "because there's this white spot out in the field." I had to say, "That's not really snow, that's actually salt. And it looks like snow." But nothing grows there. And so one of the ways that we've been able to help those on our areas is surrounded by alfalfa. The alfalfa brings out the water so it doesn't hit the breakout area and leave all those salt behind, so that it is used up by the plants. So we have an experiment this year using different types of hemp. Now, some fiber hemp goes up 8 or 10 feet tall, and it's an enormous plant. And so the question is, with different types of hemp, take out more water and solve the saline seeps quicker than alfalfa, because alfalfa takes years and years to work, but it can work, but it takes a long time. So we used 3 different types of hemp. We had a seed type, a multi-purpose type, and a fiber type. And we found that the grasshoppers moved in. They didn't destroy everything, but they came in and they worked on stuff that was still green after everything else went dry. And the nice thing about hemp is it stays green a long time as far as using water up. But they ate up the dual purpose hemp immediately, and it didn't even flower or produce seed.
Wow.
And the seed hemp, then after that was gone, then they went to the seed hemp, and by that time it was starting to flower. So the seed hemp has some seeds on it, but the leaves are all gone by the middle of August.
Yeah.
And after
So
that
was
all
oilseed hemp, right? The
oil
seed.
seed, yes, for oil seeds. And then so that's called seed hemp. And then we have the fiber hemp that's used, well, to make fiber clothes or
And ropes. Used to be
and
grown in
ropes.
Malta, Montana for ropes, jute ropes.
That's right. And all the ropes were made with hemp in those days. But anyway, that was very interesting that the grasshoppers came into that patch at the very end. So it was still growing in September, and almost the end of September, it was still growing. And it went into the seep further than those other 2, and even further than alfalfa. Alfalfa's not very salt tolerant. It doesn't grow into the salt area at all. There's only a few plants that do, like kochia, like some weeds, some grasses, foxtail grass, some things, they're salt tolerant a little bit.
Yeah.
But this fiber hemp also has some salt tolerance. So we were quite excited about this first year's results. We'll just probably cut out those other 2. We'll just plant fiber hemp now next year and see what it can do as far as a long-term effect on this saline seed. So that's another example of what we're trying to do.
And fiber hemp has a number of allelopathic properties and very deep roots. And it really was adapted to the Northern Great Plains, because they did, in the Second World War, most of the ropes came from northern Montana along the High Line with Canada.
Yeah.
And most people don't know that, but it was a big crop during the Second World War for people in Montana.
Yeah. And it's too bad it just fell out of favor. It had a bad rap. Rap.
We're not talking about that one right now.
Yeah, no, but it just goes to show you how one problem that's a perfect example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because so now we're trying to come back and say, okay, what are the positive things, and let's focus on those. So that's pretty interesting.
So you talked about earlier about how important it was to be in nature's image, like to work with nature. And if we think about the prairie, a lot of those grasses were really deep rooted, which meant that we didn't have the saline seeps, because we had roots growing down. We had a lot of photosynthesis. We had a lot of transpiration because we actually had most of the ground covered by things that were actually transpiring. And we had a lot
Yes.
more organic matter. And we had deep organic matter that was preventing that from happening. We did some experiments like that in the Palouse Prairie too, where we were growing sunflowers and safflowers together because sunflowers have those big leaves, so they act as water pumps.
Yep.
And
That's,
so again, just building up the transpiration. And we found that after 3 years, we just kept moving in. And after each year, we could move in a little farther and a little farther. And in 3 years, we had pretty much finished with the seep. So
yes,
that's another thing to try because I know that you can grow safflower really well.
yes, and we've
So-
done that too, and that's a good idea. And so what we also have learned is that once the seep is under control, never summer follow or can follow or anything, not can follow, but always grow a crop. Because in 1 year, that seep, if it's in an area where it can come back, it will come back. And so that's a really important lesson we learned in the past. But we have seen small alkali spots in neighboring pastures, but they're very small, Jill, and you can just step across them. They're almost, and the cows use them for a salt lick. So they do perform an important function, but they are not a destruction to the plant life of the whole prairie or the whole field.
Yeah, they're a natural part of the prairie.
That's right. They're part of the natural, what do you say, the system. They're part of the system. In that case, they're an important part for animals that need a salt lick on the prairie. And that's what they were used for.
Yeah. Okay. And so are there any projects that you want to do in the
Well,
future that
we
really
we're just starting some work with composting and compost extracts. And we can't, and people have talked about compost for years and years. And so when you look at the prairie and you've got thousands of acres, there's no way we can go out and compost all that. But there's been some ideas coming out of Utah, and they had some studies, and this is an extension. We got a grant with Utah State University and the University of Wyoming to look at dryland grain production with one-time application of compost. So the idea is that you put a fairly substantial amount of compost on one time, and then you look at what happens for the next 10 years. But the grant's only for 4, but we're going to continue on and just see anyway, because what they've seen in Utah is lingering effects for 10 years. That's huge, Jill. And then that means that you don't have to put compost on every year, but if you put it on, if you have a source, and if you have cattle or dairy or something nearby, you've got a source you can grab onto. And again, a lot of those sources, especially with industrial ag, a lot of those sources are just a liability. They're not an asset, and they're causing trouble instead of
that's a product.
Instead of being utilized in a way that they could be an asset. So we have a friend of mine has a lot in town in Big Sandy on the edge of town where he is just overwintering his heifers. So they're being fed mostly Timothy and a little alfalfa, and they have some straw for bedding. So they're not getting any hormones. They're not getting anything that would go into that manure that you wouldn't want to put on the soil. So that's going to be my source. And it was just spread nilly-willy on the neighboring fields at the end of each year. But if you take raw manure and you make compost out of it, you increase it way better than I do the value of that as a soil nutrient. Yeah, a huge increase in value. So that's what we're going to start doing. That's one of the projects I'm quite excited about, of just getting started in and seeing how we can utilize, especially if you have some in the neighborhood, utilize some of the neighborhood resources in ways that are now just being discarded.
Yeah, we can look just north of the border for you.
Okay.
Because when I was working with Ag Canada, we actually did some of those studies where in our organic study, we actually put compost and manure on fields, and every 3rd year. We had a point where we put manure on, and there are rules about when you can spread manure and things like that, but we didn't incorporate it because as I like to keep the soil undisturbed as much as possible.
Sure. Yeah.
And it worked really well. And it is. One thing about it is alfalfa roots, anything woody, and I don't mean wood chips, because wood chips can actually bind nutrients, and they really cause a lot of what we'll call microbial immobilization of nutrients from plants. But manure gives you organic matter, gives you a source of organic matter. It also, the nutrients leak through it, and you get the microbes too if you do it right.
Yeah. But
And
we
you
want
just
to do
need-
it right. We want to
And
do
you
it
just
right.
need to follow the regs. There's another thing too that we played with in Pacific Northwest was pelleted manure.
Yeah,
And then you can put it in furrow with the seed, and then it's like a sponge and a whole bunch of nutrients. And it really, the microbes have to work to break it down and get the nutrients, and so do the roots. I mean, it really creates a really active, a rhizosphere community in there.
Yeah,
And pellets are hard to make. So there's that other aspect of pellet mills and things like that. But they can be, the thing about it is then you're not spreading something, you're actually putting it in furrow. And
Yeah.
I think that's another way of doing things. But I thought about this and I thought, and then the other thing that I noticed you talked about was like green leaves. The one
Yeah.
thing we can grow is quinoa, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
lamb's quarters is a big time leaf,
yeah, yeah,
which is
it is.
quinoa.
Yes.
Just a
You know,
different.
and I know that they've done some in Alberta, and but we haven't got into that. And that's a good suggestion. We haven't really looked at that. I have good
Because in
friends that-
Idaho, they grow it. I know a
Yeah.
number of growers that were growing it. I grew it for a little bit. I have to tell you, because I was like, there's no reason I can't grow quinoa because, man, I got lamb's quarters coming out my ears.
Yes, yes. And
And
what's
so-
the rest of the story?
And so I grew these varieties, but I did think enough about it to grow like blue ones and red ones, like strawberry ones, and ones that had slightly different colors on them.
Yeah.
Because when you're weeding, you can't tell. That's the biggest problem. You can't tell a lamb's quarters from a quinoa.
Oh,
But then I asked myself, is there anything really wrong with eating lamb's quarters?
well, we eat them all the time when they're little. And then
Yeah,
eating
but
the leaves, they're
You
quite
can
yummy.
actually eat the seed too.
Can you? I haven't harvested any on purpose.
No,
Yeah.
and neither. But then I did harvest a bunch of them not on purpose, but they were all mixed in, and we couldn't tell the difference for the most part.
And did your buyer, did they care? The market care? Or what
Well,
happened?
no, I don't know.
That's-
I harvested it all, and nobody noticed.
Oh.
But I think it's a bit smaller than,
Yeah.
'cause they bred quinoa for the larger grain. So
Yeah.
I think it's a bit smaller, but it's another thought because you can eat the leaves of quinoa
Yeah.
just like chard. Chard's another quinopodium.
Yes.
And
Well, that's one of the purposes that we want to have our institute for, Jill, is to look at all different types of typically new or unusual crops that might have a good home for us on the Northern Great Plains that we've never even talked about before.
So before we go, I want you to talk about your school project, the last part of it, the community.
Oh, what you mean my potato project?
Yeah, that's about community.
Yes, okay. So in our town, we have a group of ranchers who have come together and decided that the meat that the kids would come home and complain about the meat at school and the school lunches. And they said, how come this doesn't taste like ours, Dad, that we have on our table? And so you can answer that question yourself.
Yeah.
Because they're buying the cheapest meat they can find. And like most of the things in America that are cheap, the nutrition is not there, the taste is not there, all kinds of things are not there, but you don't have to pay much for it. So they said, why don't we donate our cull cows, the cows that are coming in the fall and not pregnant, so they don't want to keep them over the winter because they're not going to produce a calf the next year. But they've been on grass all year, and some of them are older, so they don't make nice steaks, but they make nice hamburger. And so they got together with a butcher shop in southern Montana near Livingston, and were able to have all these cull cows butchered for free, made in a hamburger, returned to the school, and now their kids are eating high quality meat at the school lunch program. And you can taste it. And just as we talked about earlier, that the taste and the flavors really are an indication of the quality of nutrition you're eating. And so they're really excited about that. My cows, I haven't grown cows or had cows on my farm or run cattle for about 30 years because when I started going to food shows in the winter, my wife in a very kind way said, honey, I'm not going to be feeding these cows while you're gone. And nor am I going out and pulling calves if they start having trouble in the birthing process and the calving process. And I said, okay, that's a fair request. So the cows went down the road and I rented out my pastures to the neighbors. And so we haven't had any cattle since. We want to get them back now as part of the whole picture on the Institute, but we haven't had those. I wasn't involved in this project, but they asked me to come and help organize the logistics and everything and how to organize a nonprofit and everything they wanted to form and that sort of stuff. And I said, why don't we add potatoes to this mix so we can at least have meat and potatoes for our kids? And I said, I'll grow the potatoes for you. So this year we planted, about 1,000 potato plants. So it wasn't a huge quarter of an acre or something. And it wasn't a big lot, but we planted 4 different varieties that I found that were quite successful in dryland. And then I have some friends in southern Montana near the Yellowstone River at Gray Cliff Mills that have a team of horses and an old potato digger. And they said they'd be willing to come up and dig the potatoes. And I invited out kindergarten through 6th grade from the grade school to come out and watch the potatoes being dug with the horses. They had a couple of Persian draft horses, and the kids they went bonkers over it. They'd never seen that kind of stuff before.
Oh, they're beautiful horses.
And it was great fun. And then after the potatoes were dug, the kids went out and picked all those potatoes and put them in crates, which we then put in our root cellar. And then we've been taking them into school every couple of weeks. And so now the kids get to enjoy the fruit of their labors, and they get to see where their food comes from. And they get to see a little bit of the effort that goes into it. That just doesn't appear by magic in the store or on your plate. Somebody spends a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this, but they can take pride in having been a part of it. And we've had really great responses and reports back for that. In fact, you can go on krtv.com and type in Bob Quinn, and you'll see the news reel.
We'll make a link to that. I'll make sure
I will have to do that. Yeah.
And we'll make a link to it. What strikes me is what's going to happen now. They go home and they go, Dad, we get the meat tastes pretty good, but the potatoes at home just don't taste any good.
Yeah. Especially if they're coming from potato flakes, for heaven's sake.
I know. And so they're like, so what are we doing about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I've already gotten complaints with parents that said, how come my kids want to come out and help you pick your potatoes and they won't do anything work in my garden? The grass always looks greener on their side.
Oh, yeah. And it's always more fun working for somebody else.
No, I had the same experience growing up.
Oh, yeah. It's always the same thing. This has been, we've gone overtime here because we don't talk enough most of the time anyways. But I want to thank you for coming on to Tasting Terroir. And just I'll give a plug for the Quinn Institute, and we will make sure all the links are available to everybody if you want to donate or know more about what the Quinn Institute is doing.
To tell the truth, neither of us are 20 anymore, but we've had a good time along the way. And I want to say thank you for all you've done. That's what I wanted to say.
I appreciate that. And I really appreciate what you've done too. And we'll put up all the links for the various things that we've done together as well, because we've done some really good nutritional work too early on with wheats and understanding old wheats and new wheats. So folks, Tasting Terroir is supported by Regenerative and the Global Food and Farm Network. And if you want to know more, then please subscribe to the Global Food and Farm Network, and you'll see a lot more podcasts, and you'll see a lot more about what Regenerative does and what I do.
You've been listening to Tasting Terroir, a podcast that explores the fascinating links between healthy soil, regenerative farming, and great flavor. Our show explores how soil health enhances food quality and what soil health even is. It promotes regeneratively grown, nutrient-dense foods and shares the stories, tips, and recipes of innovative farmers and food producers who are building a better food system for you. Be sure to subscribe to Tasting Terroir on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. If you're a fan of our work, please consider buying us a coffee to help keep the show going. You can do that by clicking the link below and deciding on any amount you'd like to contribute. If you'd like to learn more about soil health, find upcoming soil health events, and helpful links that can help you to build your own healthy soil, please check out our website, rhizoterra.com. That's RHIZOTERRA.com. If you're interested in having Dr. Jill Clapperton speak at your event or conduct a soil health workshop, please get in touch at jillclapperton.com. Join us again next month as we continue to explore more stories about all the ways that Tasting Terroir helps you to find better food.